There is a particular kind of loneliness that doesn't fade with a phone call or a crowded room. It is a solitude so profound, it feels like exile from the world itself, a drifting away from familiar shores into an unknown internal wilderness. This loneliness is not just the absence of company, it is the silent echo of a soul evolving beyond its old self, peeling away from worn-out identities, beliefs, and attachments. It is the lonely journey of becoming someone no one quite understands yet, including sometimes yourself. Why does growth often feel like isolation? Why does breaking free from old patterns require stepping into a shadowy realm where connection seems impossible? There is a paradox at the heart of transformation. To become truly whole, the soul must first fragment, detach, and face the silence of its own depths. This is not a mere metaphor, but a psychological reality that Carl Jung called individuation, the painful but necessary process of separating the authentic self from the collective masks we wear. In this lonely space, the noise of the external world fades, and what remains is the raw encounter with one's inner truth. The familiar roles, social validations, and comforting illusions dissolve. It feels like exile because you have left behind the known, the approved, the expected. You stand at the threshold of something vast and unfamiliar, an evolving soul demanding new forms of being, thinking, and feeling. This solitude can feel like a curse, a chasm opening between you and everyone else. But what if it is actually a signal, a beacon of profound change? What if this loneliness is not emptiness, but fertile ground, a dark night where the soul prepares to emerge renewed, more integrated, more alive? As we embark on this exploration, it becomes clear that this solitude is not weakness or failure. It is the hidden price of growth, the necessary exile from collective comfort to reclaim individual truth. The journey of the evolving soul is a journey through alienation toward awakening, an invitation to understand the shadows within and the transformation waiting beyond. This is not a story of despair, but one of hope. The loneliness you feel is the unspoken language of a soul in metamorphosis. It is the painful silence before the dawn of a new self, and it is the beginning of a path that will challenge everything you thought you knew about connection, identity, and freedom. Across the tapestry of human history, the story of the soul's evolution has been told and retold through myths, legends, and spiritual teachings. These narratives, found in every culture, carry a profound truth. Transformation is never a smooth journey. It is a descent into solitude, a passage through darkness, and a confrontation with forces unseen but deeply felt. The loneliness experienced during personal growth is no modern anomaly. It is an ancient, archetypal pattern etched into the very fabric of human existence. Consider the myth of Prometheus, the titan who stole fire from the gods to give it to humanity. His act of rebellion was a solitary one, marked by immense suffering. Chained to a rock, punished endlessly, Prometheus embodies the painful cost of bringing new light into the world. His story reflects the paradox of evolution. The spark of growth is born in exile and pain to carry a higher truth or vision often means separation from the collective, isolation from those who cling to the old ways. Orpheus, the legendary musician, ventured alone into the underworld to reclaim his lost love, Eurydice. His journey was not just physical, but deeply symbolic, descending into the unconscious, facing the shadow realm where light barely reaches. His music, an expression of inner depth, was the only bridge between worlds. Yet even Orpheus's quest ended in loss and solitude, reminding us that the path of transformation demands courage to face what is hidden and unknown, often without guarantee of rescue or return. These myths are not mere stories. They are archetypal maps of the soul's journey. Carl Jung, who spent a lifetime exploring the collective unconscious, saw such myths as symbolic expressions of inner psychological processes. He argued that the experiences of isolation, alienation, and confrontation with the unconscious are universal steps toward individuation, the emergence of a more whole, integrated self. Across cultures, mystics, and spiritual seekers echo this theme. The Buddha's retreat into the forest, the Christian desert fathers' solitude in the wilderness, the shaman's journey into altered states, all speak to a necessary withdrawal from the collective to encounter the self in its rawest form. This withdrawal is not avoidance. It is essential preparation for rebirth. Alchemical traditions further deepen this symbolism. The alchemist's work begins in the Negrito phase, the blackening, where old forms die, decay, and dissolve into darkness. This stage is uncomfortable, chaotic, and isolating, yet it is fertile ground for new growth. Only after this crucible does the process move toward purification and renewal, symbolizing the soul's transformation from fragmentation to wholeness. These historical and mythological roots reveal a profound cosmic rhythm. Evolution requires severance, solitude, and suffering. The feeling of being alone during transformation is not a sign of failure or alienation from life. It is a timeless echo of the soul's call to grow beyond the familiar, to face the unconscious depths, and to emerge renewed. By situating modern experiences of existential loneliness within this vast framework, we begin to see that our personal struggles are part of a universal pattern, one that connects us with heroes, mystics, and seekers across time. The soul's evolution is a journey through darkness toward light, through isolation toward reunion with a deeper self. Understanding this allows us to reframe our loneliness not as abandonment, but as an initiation, a necessary rite of passage in the great story of human becoming. It reminds us that we are not alone in our solitude. Rather, we are walking a path walked by countless souls before us, each called to break free from the collective and confront the profound mystery within. The journey toward wholeness is often a lonely one. It is a path that demands we strip away the comfortable illusions of conformity and face the deepest parts of ourselves, parts hidden not just from the world, but sometimes even from our own awareness. This is the essence of Carl Jung's concept of individuation, the process of becoming fully oneself, integrating the conscious with the unconscious, the mask with the soul. At the heart of Jung's theory lies a tension between two fundamental forces within the psyche: the persona and the self. The persona is the social mask we wear, the identity we present to the world. It is shaped by expectations, norms, and roles imposed by society, family, and culture. This mask is necessary. It helps us navigate social life, earn acceptance, and avoid conflict. But it is only a fragment of who we truly are. Beneath the persona lies the self, the authentic core, the center of the psyche, where consciousness and unconsciousness meet. The self is whole, complex, and often mysterious. It contains hidden potentials, forgotten memories, shadow aspects we reject or fear, and the deepest desires of our soul. Individuation means bridging the gap between the persona and the self, shedding illusions, and embracing the entirety of one's being. This process is rarely smooth or comfortable. To individuate is to break free from collective expectations, to question inherited beliefs, and to confront the parts of ourselves that have been suppressed or denied. It requires a painful withdrawal from social conformity, which often leads to feelings of isolation, alienation, and misunderstanding. The evolving soul feels this deeply. The loneliness that emerges is not merely social loneliness, but an existential solitude. Jung's case studies reveal the intensity of this inner struggle. One patient described her journey as descending into a dark cavern where she met frightening figures, representations of her shadow self, only to discover later that these encounters were essential steps toward healing. Another recounted feeling increasingly estranged from friends and family as she pursued a path of inner exploration and self-discovery. These stories illustrate that individuation is not avoidance of life, but a courageous confrontation with one's shadow, the unconscious reservoir of repressed feelings and instincts. The shadow is a key element in this process. It is not evil, but the parts of ourselves we deny: anger, jealousy, vulnerability, and primal impulses. Ignoring the shadow leads to psychic fragmentation and exhaustion, while facing it demands honesty and bravery. This confrontation often requires solitude, not as a means of escaping reality, but as a space to integrate conflicting elements within. Individuation ultimately heals the psyche by weaving together these fragments into a coherent whole. It transcends the superficial roles we play and the narratives imposed upon us, allowing us to embody an authentic, integrated self. However, the price is solitude, because the collective often resists this transformation. The individuated soul is misunderstood or even rejected because it no longer fits neatly into predefined molds. This loneliness is paradoxically a sign of growth. It is a marker that we are shedding old skins, discarding worn identities, and stepping into the unknown terrain of selfhood. Jung himself retreated from society at times, most famously during his years at Bollingen Tower, where he engaged in deep inner work. His solitude was not isolation, but a vital space for transformation. Understanding individuation as a lonely path to wholeness reframes our experience of isolation. It teaches that solitude is not a punishment or a failure, but an essential stage in becoming who we truly are. The journey inward demands that we face discomfort and uncertainty, but it also promises liberation from psychic fragmentation and the birth of a more authentic life. For those who feel misunderstood, disconnected, or exhausted by the pressure to conform, Jung's insight offers profound reassurance. The loneliness you experience is not a sign of weakness, but a testament to your soul's evolution. It is a call to embrace your shadow, integrate your unconscious depths, and move toward wholeness, even if the path leads you away from the crowd and into the silent, transformative terrain of the self. In a world more connected than ever, paradoxically, the experience of loneliness has reached epidemic proportions. We scroll through endless feeds of curated lives, saturated with images promising belonging, success, and happiness. Yet many find themselves feeling more isolated, misunderstood, and restless. This contradiction is not accidental. It reveals a profound psychological and social tension that unfolds when the soul begins to evolve. In an age designed to suppress that very evolution, Carl Jung's insights into individuation, a journey toward wholeness, are more relevant now than ever. The evolving soul, striving to integrate deeper truths and break free from collective illusions, often finds itself at odds with the dominant culture. The digital age has amplified this conflict in ways Jung could never have anticipated. On one hand, technology connects us superficially across time zones and continents. On the other, it erects invisible walls of distraction, comparison, and social conditioning that deepen the chasm between the authentic self and the masses. Social media platforms, those modern public squares, often function less as spaces for genuine connection and more as arenas of performative identity. Here, conformity masquerades as individuality, where the pressure to fit in wears the guise of curated uniqueness. The evolving individual who questions mainstream narratives or refuses to accept simplistic binaries risks being labeled weird, outcast, or even dangerous. Authentic seekers who dare to diverge from the norm frequently encounter ridicule, misunderstanding, or silent exclusion. This social resistance is no coincidence. It is structural. Mass culture depends on a degree of homogeneity to maintain control and predictability. Systems of power, whether economic, political, or media-driven, thrive on conformity because it sustains consumer habits, obedience, and the suppression of disruptive ideas. When the soul begins to awaken and evolve, it challenges this status quo. The very act of spiritual growth becomes a subtle form of rebellion, provoking fear and pushback from the collective. The psychological cost of this conflict manifests in what psychologists today describe as existential loneliness, a pervasive sense of emptiness and disconnection that goes beyond mere social isolation. Unlike being physically alone, existential loneliness is a profound internal experience tied to the soul's crisis. It is the feeling of standing on the edge of a vast unknown, separated not only from others, but also from the familiar parts of oneself. Anxiety and depression often accompany this state, symptoms that modern psychiatry recognizes as the body and mind's response to profound psychic fragmentation. Scientific studies now reveal how chronic exposure to digital stimuli disrupts our attention and neurochemical balance. The constant barrage of notifications, the dopamine-driven feedback loops, and the relentless comparison to idealized images foster stress, burnout, and a fragmented sense of self. These physiological and psychological effects compound the spiritual struggles, making the path of individuation even more treacherous. Yet, beneath these challenges lies a profound invitation. The very loneliness and alienation that plague the evolving soul can be seen as signals, warning lights illuminating the fracture between authentic selfhood and imposed identities. Recognizing the societal and technological forces at play is crucial for anyone seeking to navigate this terrain with clarity and courage. It becomes an act of resistance to question whether the norms and structures designed to keep us in line might actually be suppressing the full blossoming of human potential. To understand the social costs of spiritual evolution today is to see the subtle ways in which power operates, not always through overt oppression, but through the shaping of desires, fears, and definitions of normality. It means acknowledging that the feeling of being an outsider is often not a personal failing, but a signpost of deeper transformation. The evolving soul's isolation is not merely unfortunate, it is a necessary rupture from the collective illusion that paves the way for a new kind of freedom. This awareness opens a door to solidarity among those who feel alienated, not as lost souls drifting aimlessly, but as pioneers charting the boundaries of consciousness in a world resistant to change. It challenges us to question the systems that frame our experiences and to seek communities and practices that honor authenticity rather than conformity. Ultimately, the psychological and social costs of spiritual evolution today reveal a fundamental truth. True growth will always encounter resistance, not just within ourselves, but from the culture that seeks to contain us. The loneliness felt is the echo of that struggle, a profound, unsettling invitation to awaken, to stand apart, and to reclaim the power of the evolving soul. There comes a moment on every authentic, spiritual path when the lights dim, the certainties you once leaned on dissolve, the voices that guided you go silent, and in the stillness, something darker begins to stir. It's not the world turning against you, it's you turning towards something long buried. This is the threshold Jung called the shadow, and mystics across centuries knew it by another name, the dark night of the soul. Most people imagine spiritual growth as a steady climb upward, a radiant unfolding into light. But those who've truly walked the path know better. Real growth isn't linear, it spirals, it descends. Before the soul can rise into its fullness, it must first descend into its depths, into the underworld of the psyche, where the parts of ourselves we fear, repress, or deny wait silently in the dark. Jung understood the shadow as all that we refuse to see in ourselves. The anger we suppress, the jealousy we hide, the wounds we never tend to. These elements don't disappear. They retreat into the unconscious, shaping our behavior from behind the scenes. Left unexamined, they control us. But when the soul begins to evolve, it can no longer ignore what's been cast aside. To individuate, to become whole, means to integrate the shadow. But this process is not a gentle unveiling. It is a confrontation, a psychic reckoning. The person you think you are meets the person you've buried, and often they are strangers, or worse, enemies. The deeper you go, the lonelier it feels, because no one can walk this part of the journey for you. Friends can't save you. Culture can't distract you. Even spirituality, if used as escape, fails you. It's just you, stripped of masks, staring into the abyss of your own being. This is the dark night of the soul, a term born from Christian mysticism, but resonant across traditions. Saint John of the Cross, who coined the phrase, described it not as divine punishment, but divine preparation, a purifying fire that incinerates illusion, pride, and false hope, leaving only what is real. It feels like death, because something is dying. The ego's illusions, the persona's pretenses, the comforts of unconscious life. But the darkness is not the enemy. It is the womb of rebirth. To resist this descent is to prolong the pain. To surrender to it is to open the possibility of transformation. Yet surrender doesn't mean passivity. It means courage. The courage to face memories you'd rather forget, to admit the truths that shatter your self-image, to walk through despair without rushing to medicate it away. This kind of suffering is sacred. It's not the suffering of being broken. It's the suffering of being reassembled into something more whole. Modern society, however, offers few tools for this inner descent. Everything is oriented toward upward mobility, instant gratification, and surface-level positivity. We're taught to avoid pain, not to learn from it, to curate identity, not to dismantle it. In this way, the dark night becomes not only personally isolating, but culturally invisible. There's no language for it in everyday discourse, no metrics to measure it, no social media post that captures its essence. And so, many suffer in silence, believing their pain is meaningless. But it's not meaningless. It's misunderstood. Because the dark night is not depression in the clinical sense. It may resemble it, even overlap with it, but it carries a different signature. It's not a descent into numbness, but a descent into intensity. Everything you once knew is called into question, meaning unravels, and yet something deep within whispers, "Keep going, there is something on the other side." Jung believed that neurosis often emerges when the shadow is ignored, but when we face it, when we draw it out of the unconscious and into dialogue, it ceases to control us. The shadow becomes teacher, not tormentor. The monster in the cave turns out to be a part of you, rejected, misunderstood, but essential. The key is to remain with it, not to flee, to sit in the cave as the ancient initiates did, to endure the chaos of inner disintegration until clarity emerges. And it will, but not in the way you expect. You won't return as the same person. The old patterns will no longer fit. The roles you used to play may crumble, but what you gain is something far more valuable than comfort: authenticity. This authenticity is not flashy. It may not be recognized or rewarded, but it is real, and it grants a kind of quiet power, the power of self-possession, of being no longer ruled by fear, shame, or conditioning. It's the foundation for true inner freedom. Facing your inner demons is not an act of indulgence. It's an act of liberation. The world often tells us to be strong by suppressing emotion, but true strength is found in vulnerability, in the willingness to confront the chaos within and to emerge, not polished, but purified. The shadow and the dark night are not detours from the path. They are the path. The soul evolves not through avoidance, but through embrace. And though this journey is often walked alone, it leads not to isolation, but to integration. It prepares you to live not as a fractured fragment, but as a unified whole. In this way, darkness becomes a kind of grace, not the absence of light, but the womb of it, not the enemy of the soul, but its crucible. And only by walking through it, through fear, shame, sorrow, and silence, can we ever hope to emerge as who we truly are. When you have faced the darkness and stood still in the silence of your own unraveling, something profound begins to shift. Not a dramatic transformation overnight, but a quiet reorientation of your being. You begin to see the world not through the eyes of who you were, but through the gaze of someone who has returned from the depths. The journey inward, though isolating, was never meant to end in exile. Its true purpose is to return you, not to the same life, but to a deeper form of connection, one no longer based on masks or roles, but on truth. Carl Jung called this the process of integration. Having faced the shadow, acknowledged the inner tensions between the persona and the self, the next stage is synthesis. The fragments of the psyche, once scattered or suppressed, begin to align into a cohesive whole. You are no longer a copy of societal expectations or a performance of borrowed identities. You are you, undivided, though still evolving. And from this place, something remarkable becomes possible. Genuine connection, not the kind of connection rooted in shallow affirmation or conditional belonging, but a deeper communion, the meeting of two integrated beings who don't need each other to fill a void, but who choose to walk beside each other in mutual respect, curiosity, and presence. It's a radical shift from the default mode of our age. In a hyper-connected digital society, we're surrounded by interactions but starved for intimacy. We scroll past curated avatars, mistaking engagement for empathy. But individuation teaches us to crave something more, relationships that mirror the soul, not just flatter the ego. This return to authentic connection doesn't mean returning to the same people or environments you left behind. In fact, many of those connections may have been predicated on your false self, and as you shed that self, those bonds may dissolve naturally. This can be painful, but it creates space for something real to emerge. Jung believed that once we've individuated, once we've walked through the fire of transformation, we have a responsibility to return to the collective, not to conform to it, but to contribute to it, to bring our wholeness into the world as a healing force. In this way, community becomes not a trap, but a sacred ground, a space where differentiated individuals can gather, not in uniformity, but in unity. We see glimpses of these new communities emerging today, not in the mainstream, but on the fringes, where creative collectives, conscious circles, and philosophical forums gather to explore the deeper questions of life. These aren't spaces for performance, but for presence. They hold room for contradiction, complexity, and vulnerability. They don't demand perfection, but integrity. Whether it's a group of artists resisting commodification, a circle of thinkers dismantling inherited dogmas, or a quiet, spiritual community devoted to inner work, these are the oases for the evolving soul. They provide not answers, but resonance, not escape, but anchoring. And perhaps most importantly, they remind us that we are not alone, not in our suffering and not in our longing. There are others who have also walked through fire, others who know the silence of the dark night, the sting of being misunderstood, and the joy of returning as something real. These are not crowds, they are constellations, and even if they're few in number, their impact is vast, because one authentic relationship, one conversation rooted in truth, can recalibrate the soul more than 1,000 superficial ones. But connection begins with integration. If we return to the world seeking to be completed by others, we fall back into the old traps. If we return to share ourselves, not our performance, but our presence, then community becomes a mirror, not a mask. This is the final paradox of the soul's journey, that we must first learn to be alone in order to truly connect, that the deepest solitude prepares us for the deepest relationships, and that only by losing the world can we return to it, not as a captive, but as a creator. You don't need to fit in to belong. You don't need to be many to be meaningful. What matters is alignment with yourself, with truth, and with others who are walking their own path with honesty and courage. So if you've been through the dark, if you've stared down your shadow, if you've questioned everything and come back more whole, don't retreat, re-engage, but do so from the center of your being. Carry your solitude like a lantern. Let it illuminate the way for others still lost in the noise. Not by preaching, but by being. Not by teaching, but by embodying. Because when the soul evolves, it doesn't just escape, it returns. And in that return, it becomes a quiet revolution, a ripple in the collective psyche, a reminder that depth is not dead, that truth is not obsolete, and that connection, real, soul-to-soul connection, is still possible in a world of illusions. This is not the end of your journey. It's the beginning of a new kind of presence, one that no longer needs the world's validation, but still chooses to give the world its authenticity, and that, in a time of mass distraction, is the rarest form of power. Loneliness is not the enemy, it is the gate, not the barren void that so many fear, but the crucible, the fire where false selves are burned away and truth is revealed. We are taught to escape it, to drown it in noise, in validation, in movement. But those who evolve come to know a different reality. They learn that silence does not mean absence, it means presence, stripped of illusion. What if the ache of being alone isn't a flaw in you, but a signpost? What if it's not a punishment, but a passage? The soul, in its most sacred journey, often travels alone, not because it is broken, but because it is becoming. The path of individuation demands separation from the herd, from the mask, from the comfort of unconscious belonging. It demands the courage to be misunderstood, to lose the world in order to find yourself. And that pain you feel, that ache of disconnection, that's not failure. That's the very friction of transformation. It's the stretching of old skin that no longer fits. It's the disintegration of stories you once called identity. You're not falling apart. You're unfolding. Carl Jung called this the privilege of a lifetime, to become who you truly are, not who the world expects, not who the system rewards, but who you were always meant to be before fear got in the way, before you were taught to shrink, to mold, to mask. This path is not paved with applause. There are no guarantees, no maps, no milestones, just an inner compass, subtle, often trembling, but true, and following it will cost you your comfort, your certainty, maybe even your sense of belonging. But what it gives you is far greater. Freedom, the kind of freedom that doesn't need to be seen to exist, the kind that can stand alone without collapsing, the kind that can walk into a crowded room, no longer seeking approval, but offering presence, offering truth. There will be moments when the silence feels unbearable, when the absence of connection seems louder than any noise. But listen closely, because that silence is where the soul begins to speak. That is where the real voice emerges, not the reactive echo of culture, but the steady whisper of who you really are. And in time, something beautiful happens. The loneliness that once felt like exile transforms into sovereignty. The solitude that once felt like death becomes a sanctuary. And you begin to realize you never needed to belong to the world's illusion. You only needed to belong to yourself. Then, and only then, can you re-enter the world, not to conform, but to create, not to fit in, but to stand out, not from ego, but from essence. So if you find yourself walking the lonely road, don't turn back. Don't numb the ache. Don't trade your evolution for acceptance. Walk on. Walk into the dark night. Walk through the dissonance. Walk past the gates of who you were and toward the quiet brilliance of who you're becoming. Because in the end, it is in the stillness of solitude, not in the applause of the crowd, that the soul finds its voice. And when it does, it doesn't whisper for permission. It sings.